Hello and welcome to Wellness TV. My name is Kimberly Haas. Today we're doing a very special show about distracted driving in New Hampshire. As many of you know, there is a new hands-free law in effect when it comes to cell phones to prevent distracted driving crashes. I am with three special guests today. I have Marilyn Bachman from Amherst, New Hampshire. I'm also joined by Howard Hedegaard with the Injury Prevention Center at Dartmouth. And I have Captain Vern Thomas, a great friend of the show. He is with the Derry Police Department. I'll have each of you start by saying a little bit about yourself, maybe introducing yourself better for the audience at home, starting with you, Marilyn.
Sure. Marilyn Bachman. I live in Amherst, New Hampshire. My husband, John Bachman, was struck and killed on December 21st, 2013. In front of my house, getting his mail by a distracted driver. And since that time, I've found that my ambitions have turned on a positive note, and now that the law is coming into effect in July 1st, promoting, I'm a huge advocate for hands-free driving.
Thank you. Howard, I'll have you go next.
I'm the Highway Safety Specialist at the Injury Prevention Center, Dartmouth, and everything that I do throughout the week is education-based, trying to raise the awareness of New Hampshire drivers, young and old, about the true risks of driving and the responsibilities that we have. In addition to the work that I do at Dartmouth, I am the lead instructor for the New Hampshire Traffic Safety Institute, and we present a National Safety Council driving attitude course on Saturdays throughout the state. And a key part of that conversation in the attitude courses is about distracted driving, because it's just such an ever-increasing problem, not only in New Hampshire, but across our country.
Hello, Vern Thomas from the Derry Police Department. I'm here representing the police department and the officers who will be enforcing the new law, and we are very supportive of the new law. In fact, the town of Derry has taken a position already with town employees and has already put in place some of the same things that are in place for this statute for town employees. So we're already on the ball for that. We will be aggressively enforcing this new statute and hopefully making our roads a little bit safer.
And we thank you for sharing your perspective today, Vern. Without local law enforcement's help, tragedies like the one that affected your family, Marilyn, would still happen after July 1st. So having that partnership with law enforcement to make sure that we all remain safe on the road is very crucial. And we'll get back to that portion of this entire endeavor in a little bit. But first, Marilyn, I'd like for you to share John's story a little bit more in depth. He was a really great person and a pillar of the Amherst community.
Oh, yes. He was involved in multitudes of faceted areas of life, and he enjoyed everything. Very rarely, if ever, have I ever seen him not in a good mood or have a frown on his face. He was, as you see the picture of him, with a huge smile, and that was the way he lived his life. He loved everything. Yes, John, he was a private business owner. He was involved in the Amherst Fire Department for many, many years, and rose to the rank of fire chief for the Amherst Fire Department. He was a vegetable and berry grower, multiple mini farm, as we used to call it, with strawberries and blueberries and raspberries. And John did things in multiples. So when I say blueberries and raspberries, each one of those type of plants had multiple varieties. We had our own vegetable garden and so on. He was a master gardener. We started planting Christmas trees, and that was one of the thoughts of perhaps one day we would have a Christmas tree farm. So I mean, as you can see, we went from one aspect of life to another aspect of life, and we always did things together. In the last several years, he became a very gourmet cook. We had our kitchen totally remodeled, and everything was to his specification. So, and I was never allowed in the kitchen, which was okay by me. He would sit there, I would say, John, what can I help you do? And he'd say, nothing, you just sit there and you look pretty for me.
Oh.
So, we shared a lot of very special moments.
What a sweet relationship. How many years were you married? I know we have a wedding photo of you two here, maybe that you could hold up for the
Sure.
audience at home.
Yeah. This was when John was the fire chief, and he had his dress uniform on. And the dress I have on was borrowed from a cousin. We were married 22 years.
Yeah. And so I understand that John was hit by a distracted driver.
Mm-hmm. Maybe
Maybe you could explain exactly what happened on that tragic day.
Sure. It was a Monday, and he has his business offices on our property. And it's detached from the house, and we were having lunch together and talking about our future and a vacation that we were going to begin to plan. And he went back out to his office, and being 2 days before Christmas, I had a last-minute errand I was going to run out and do. So I went back in the back of the house and just, put on my coat and what have you. And on my way out the door to let John know I was leaving, I could hear this continuous moaning call, which was very unusual for where we live. We don't usually hear things like this. And I thought, well, it sounds like someone's calling a dog. So I went out the door, and the calls became louder. And I went to walk at the end of my driveway, and John was laying in the snowbank, covered with blood, and calling for help. I had my cell phone in my coat pocket, and I called 911 and started yelling for people to stop because they couldn't see him. And the cars then stopped and gave assistance by calling the police and so on. And they arrived shortly thereafter with the EMTs, and took him to the hospital. And I went there shortly with John's daughter, Pam. And when we arrived at the emergency room, they had taken him to have a CAT scans and x-rays so they could determine the length of his accident. And came back in the room, and they had all kinds of machinery hooked up. And he was conscious. And he tried to talk, but he would go in and out of consciousness. And I kept walking around him. And I don't know why I was doing this. I was like checking his arms and his hands for bruising and his ankles and that. I suspected he had internal injuries, but I wasn't sure. And of course the doctors and nurses were very busy. It was a short time after that, and John looked up at me, and I was holding his hand, and he squeezed it 2 times. And that was a sign we used to give each other, to say, I love you. And he immediately went into a cardiac arrest and died.
Oh, Marilyn, I am so sorry to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you two loved each other very much. I'm sure he's still watching over you today.
I'm sure of it.
But Still, that grief is so much to bear.
It gives me the courage to do what I'm doing now and to get the word out there. It's not affected my life, it's affected my family and the multitude of friends that we have, their families. There's, I'm sure, thousands of people.
And just to think of it and to put it into perspective to Howard and Vern, we see people driving distracted every day. It seems like we're just addicted to our cell phones. We're addicted to doing something in the car, even if it's not with the cell phones, but doing something in the car. Howard, how many people per year in New Hampshire are injured or severely severely injured or killed due to these types of behaviors?
Distracted driving in general, most of which is electronic device related, is an ever-increasing problem across our state. From 2009 through 2013, here in New Hampshire alone, there were at least 116 people who lost their lives in distracted driving related crashes. Again, many of them, most of them, electronic device related. And I say at least because that's the best numbers that we have, meaning often when a crash event happens, the driver is not readily going to say, I was driving distracted. And I contrast that with the reality that for at least 7 years, while teaching my attitude driving courses, I ask this specific question. I ask, how many of you can honestly say that while driving, you do nothing to distract you? And you know, over 7 years, almost every Saturday, nobody has put up their hand. Everybody in that environment anyway is willing to acknowledge that yes, I too drive distracted. It won't be long before we see that we have more crashes, injury-related, death-related, and even just the fender benders, caused by distraction than we have had forever, for many years, from impairment, alcohol, and drug-related type crashes. 27% of the total crashes during that 4-year window in which we lost 116 people, 27% of the crashes, that's 1 out of 4, a little more than that even, caused by distraction. And that's exactly why we do what we do to educate the public about why they can't afford to do that. We have a tendency to believe that somehow we're different from anybody else, that somehow we're a little better, somehow we're safer as drivers, somehow we're more masterful at monitoring both our driving and our distraction. And that's a great deception. That's a huge deception. And somehow we have to identify the fact that it's just not true. Unfortunately, most of us don't identify with that until the time comes that we cause a crash, such as the one that took John's life, or we become the victims of somebody else causing that crash, you know, that type of thing. It's just a hard thing. We think we have to live in a busy, crazy, paced sort of way, and we really don't. We can focus. We can take the time to focus on our driving and make our phone calls, send our text messages, do whatever else it is that we're doing while we're driving at some other time. There is enough time. We just have to commit ourselves to making that happen. One of the unfortunate things is that the work that I do is way too often I am working with people or being with people like Marilyn who have to tell a very, very similar story. And you know, there's no rewind button. When the crash event happens, you can't say, ooh, I don't like what I just caused, or I don't like the fact that I'm a victim, and therefore I want to hit rewind and make it go away. You can't. You're forced to live through it, and it will touch your life, I believe, forever. You know, I don't know how it is possible for Marilyn or others who are living a similar story to continue their life without it being just a constant part of it. And I think it's so wrong for somebody to walk to their mailbox, a routine thing that many of us in rural New Hampshire do, for us to walk to our mailbox and our life ends because somebody else is deciding not to be a focused driver.
Vern, what are you seeing on the local police level when it comes to enforcement? What are your officers on the street observing as they try to make the roadways safer?
Well, in history, as long as I've been in law enforcement investigating traffic accidents, distracted driving has been a huge issue. It's always been the most significant cause of an accident, and it was someone playing with a radio or doing something else that's distracting. And that was, going back into the 80s, that was what people did that caused these crashes. But now we have social media, we have smartphones, and young people especially get these smartphones when they're young and before they even have a driver's license. So they get their driver's license after they're used to playing with the telephone. The telephone's part of their life. And they incorporate it into their driving. And certainly what we're looking to do now is cut that away from their driving activities, do that later. But as far as what's happening now, there is a texting statute. It prohibited texting. That law went into effect because we in the state recognized that people were using these devices and it was distracting them while they were driving. And what we initially had was people holding their telephone up and they were sending their messages while they're trying to drive. We enacted a legislation for anti-texting, and the phones went down here so that you wouldn't see them doing it. Now they're not even looking up. And we've had that issue many times. Very difficult to enforce the law because from a law enforcement standpoint, we're usually behind these people. Unless there's a traffic collision, we won't necessarily know that that was the reason that something occurred or the reason why someone might be swerving, but those are the things that we see. But if you're in your lane and you're swerving, if you cross that solid line, you're going to potentially impact somebody here. You cross this line, you may encounter a pedestrian or a bicyclist or something else. So we see that driving behavior, but we can't always attribute it to texting or something like that. Where we are now, absolutely you're going to see somebody with a telephone. If you walk out of this door right now and drive down the street, you'll see somebody on a telephone someplace.
Right.
That is the conduct that's prohibited. That's some of the conduct that's prohibited by the new statute. And hopefully that will give us the teeth that we need to get people to put the thing down, put it away. There's many other things that people can do, especially with their families, to try to make that better, but we see that now, the distractions of people on the telephone going through a traffic light or passing through a crosswalk where there's someone waiting to cross. Violations of the law, we see those things occurring, and attributed to distracted driving. Maybe we can make this better.
It's so important that people really understand what's happening with our brains when we're on the telephone or texting with somebody while trying to drive. We just can't multitask like that. It's humanly impossible. And sometimes when you see the demonstrations at, a highway safety conference or something like that, and people try to do the simulators, they start to realize it. But I'll tell you, I stopped using my phone in my car many years ago, and I was thinking about it today on the way down. If I had still been a person that used my phone in my car, I would have missed a number of things on the way from Barrington, including runners running in a race, a woman bringing her wheelbarrow to the end of the street. She was working on her lawn. I would have missed a number of cyclists. I probably would have missed a man pulling in with his boat, and he had to go a little bit more slowly because he had a boat on the end of it. So there's many things around us that are happening every day. And sometimes when you live in that cycle where I have to talk on my phone because it's important, it's work, or I have to talk on my phone, it's important, it's my husband, you miss some of those other things going on around you that you start to notice when you put the phone down. And I hope that some of our audience members decide to do that today and start to really re-examine their behavior, because you're right, Vern, so many people, it's just a part of their life. They are so used to it, and they're not really thinking about what they're doing while they're trying to drive, and oftentimes missing things like traffic lights or pedestrians that are trying to cross the street. Howard, what do we know about the brain research behind some of these laws, and how does it apply to what we're talking about today?
Oh, there's just so much, an ever-increasing amount of evidence showing that we cannot multitask as much as we think we can, as much as we deceive ourselves into believing that we can. And the studies all agree with one another. They build on what we've known historically. For example, there's a number of studies out that show that while texting, you are 23 times more likely to be in a crash than while driving as a focused driver. Focus meaning that you are paying attention to your primary responsibility, i.e. driving kind of thing. And when you think about the fact that at the simple speed, and I say simple meaning that many people drive faster than this, but at 50 miles an hour, we're traveling almost 75 feet a second. And according to the cell phone industry, the average text message takes 4.6 seconds to create and send. So 4.6 seconds at 75 feet a second, we've gone longer than the length of a football field, goalpost to goalpost, while we're looking down, while we're cognitively focused on the message we're sending and not on all of the things that are happening on the roadway, such as those that you just described. The crash risk is huge. And when you think about 75 feet a second, take any speed you're traveling, multiply it by 1.5, and that will give you approximate feet traveled. And when we think about miles per hour, it's too big of a number, but feet per second becomes far more relevant. So at, say, 75 feet a second, how long is it going to take you while distracted to cross the center line into another vehicle, or to cross to the right into the off-road area where John was standing, for example? It's huge. We just cannot do it. We can't do it well. Basically, what we're doing is we're switching from one task to another and then back to the original task, back and forth kind of stuff, as opposed to conducting both tasks at the same time. We're just not wired for that.
Marilyn, what do you find when you talk to your family and friends about this issue? Of course, they have obvious reasons to be very passionate about it. Do they find it hard as well to remain focused behind the wheel? Have you heard anybody say anything like that?
Oh, I can tell you that multiple people in my family, myself included, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and some of our very best friends, they take their cell phones and put them in the glove compartment. So it's a huge impact.
That's a great plan because you can't reach it in the glove compartment. Do they put them on silent as well so they can't hear?
I don't know about that part, but they're out of reach and out of sound, you know.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Just being conscious and making good choices.
It really is so important, and it can be as easy as putting on our seat belts. I mean, so many of us are just used to buckling up. I'm hoping that our audience members will decide to do the same thing, like Marilyn suggests, put the phone away, maybe turn it off so you can't hear it. Vern, is there something that you'd like to add to that? What are some of the suggestions your officers have been giving to people during things like Operation Safe Commute, which have been happening here in the town of Derry for quite some time?
It's interesting who you actually stop that's committed a violation and the reasons why they're committing them. And I'll give you an example of, I stopped a car that was weaving substantially. I was coming to work, it was early in the morning, and I pulled over this car that, you know, this guy has to get off the road. That was what I'm thinking, and I walked up to him and he had his breakfast laid out on the seat of his car. And after I got his license and registration, I realized he's an attorney. And he said, you know, I know way better than to be doing this, and there's my stuff and it shouldn't be there. And he apologized and the stuff went away and he drove straight. So I think that's where we make our impact, is when we have that kind of a contact. Going forward with this new statute, I think that what we'll be doing will be a lot different in terms of, you know, you see the telephone, this is your one shot, not to be doing this again. And if we have a second contact, or maybe even the first time, depending on how egregious the conduct was that led us to pull the car over, there's a traffic summons for somebody. The fines are substantial. So we've been trying to tell people this is an expensive proposition for you to make this mistake, so please put it down. We've been working with the two schools next, which is the new charter school, and Pinkerton Academy, which is the high school that our kids go to in Derry. And the kids are very interested in pushing forward the concept of this law and educating their peers. And they're putting together public service announcements and things like that, and we've been deeply involved with them. And I think they are going to be the success for the future for us if they can get their message across. there's some very good energy right now. I hope we can keep that going. But that's the kind of thing that we can, as law enforcement, we can participate in that, make an impact there, and have a lot of contact with those younger people who are just getting their driver's license. So that's really where I think we'll be making our most impact until the statute goes into effect, is the education piece. And then after that, hopefully we won't have a lot of cars to pull over.
I agree with you, Vern. That peer pressure part of it is so important in life. Obviously, people don't want to pay a big ticket, you know, but to have their friend group around them saying, this is not acceptable, we are not doing this as a society, I think it's sometimes even more helpful. So I'm hoping that everybody at home who's watching today's show will also take up that momentum and start to educate their peer group, no matter how young or old they are, about the dangers of cell phones, because this isn't just a teenage person issue anymore. Things have changed so much with the cell phones that oftentimes retirees are using cell phones now as their main form of communication as opposed to landlines, and it's just as addictive, and I hate to say that word, but it is just as stimulating for the human brain at 70 years old to receive a text message from their wife or their husband as it is for, you know, a young 16-year-old to receive a text message from their sweetheart. So that compulsion to pick up the phone is still there, no matter what age people are. Howard, what is the state doing as far as education? What's new with that? I know a lot of what was happening with this law as it came into effect is that education component of it, so we get the message out.
There's a lot that we're doing. The state has a strategic highway safety plan. And as part of the effort to educate people on this, we actually developed a new focus area, which is a marketing education, community education piece. And on a monthly basis, there's an amazing group, and I think amazing is the absolute right word, considering that Maryland is part of that group, and there are folks from AT&T, University of New Hampshire, Dartmouth College, the Children's Hospital at Dartmouth, the New Hampshire Auto Dealers Association, law enforcement, the Department of Transportation, Department of Health and Human Services, a real collaborative effort, and that's why I used the word amazing, that are just constantly planning different ways of educating, and we won't stop educating after July 1st, after the effect date, because we know it's going to take time for people to really make that commitment to change. So some of the things specifically that are happening, we have distributed posters, small flyers that can be passed out. Thousands and thousands of those have gone out. For example, Meineke, the auto repair shops in New Hampshire, their signage outside is advertising the new law. They're giving the handouts to all of their customers. We're developing, we'll take a look at it again this Wednesday, different little pads, tear-off pads that the law enforcement folks can give to drivers anytime they pull them over for whatever reasons, to educate them on that. We've got the electronic signage boards that are going out. I recently sent an email to all of the principals of high schools and elementary schools in the state of New Hampshire and requesting them to do some kind of an article in their school newspapers or on the school websites. There's just a real one of the really exciting things that's coming out of this is the New Hampshire auto dealers have developed a sign that's about half the size of a steering wheel, sit down over the top of the steering wheel. And the plans are to put that sign on every new vehicle sold in the state of New Hampshire. And that signage will look at distracted driving and the hands-free law in particular. So that will give the sales rep an opportunity to talk to the customer about the importance of not driving distracted. So just a real cross-section of different things. Hopefully it will work.
What a beautiful business partnership.
Oh,
I really would love to commend that organization for helping spread the message in such a really nice way, with that opportunity for the sales rep to talk to the new owner about this in a casual, non-government telling you what to do sort of way. And of course we do need the government to enforce these laws, you know, first of all, create these laws and then enforce these laws to protect us all, which is part of the reason behind these laws. But to have that friendly conversation, that's really amazing as well. Now, Marilyn, I want to turn back to you and ask what your future plans are, how you plan to help advocate for this new law.
Well, we recently have had a press conference rolling out the hands-free law. The New Hampshire Dealership Association sponsored this along with state police, and that was a huge success. Going forward, I have several engagements with school assemblies with children, so we can make it real to them. And I'm sure that anyone that has been involved in an accident or anything similar to this probably wishes that they weren't part of it. And I'm just hoping that if we can save one person not to be involved in this type of a tragedy is just being successful. And if I can tell my story and people will really listen, it'll save a lot of heartache for a lot of families.
I hope that you today at home are listening to Marilyn's story. John was a very decent man whose life was taken away from him far too early. They had so many plans together. And I hope that you at home as well will decide to help advocate for change on the roadways. I know all of you are seeing distracted driving on the roadways, and I hope too at the same time that you please put down your cell phone and you stop using it in the vehicle. We have lots of time between here and July 1st to make sure that you break those bad habits. And even if after July 1st you watch this show, please put down the phone still. There's always time for safety. And I want to close out today's show with a card that John had sent to Marilyn. If you don't mind just reading that portion of the card that he had sent to
you. Oftentimes John would write love poems to me throughout our 22 years of marriage. And I came across this card, and I hope it hits home to a lot of people. And I look forward to the privilege of growing old and holding hands with you. And John has written in his own handwriting, let's hold hands through the rest of our lives. I love you.
Oh, Marilyn. That's so sweet. And I know it's something that you're going to cherish and hold on to for forever. And I hope that folks at home who are watching this show today really think about this and make sure that they hear Marilyn's story. Once again, for Wellness TV, this is Kimberly Haas. Have a great day.